The Mound of the Masters was a short building nowadays. Around it, the city of mud had grown vertically instead of horizontally. That decision was made long ago, before the conflict with the ants started. Since the termites had taken over the wall's construction entirely, the crafters, not willing to be outdone, got to work in other ways. Dim wished this competition had never started. Mud used to be exactly what its name had implied: muddy. Dim liked mud. He liked the old earthy mounds and structures that could have flowers planted on top of them. He liked it when the buildings didn't hold cube-like shapes. And he especially liked seeing dirt rather than a silver coating that currently covered most buildings. The silver coating had its uses. The ants couldn't dig through it, for one. Its reflective nature also made for less attacks on mud during the mid-chime. What was more, it apparently had some waterproofing properties, and attacks by the gods were nearly non-existent now. But Dim didn't care. Often it was too bright to go look for flowers. He shook his head while looking at the Telmern, the largest complete building that was totally encased in silver. It was a waste of material and effort. Like the fancy robes and the fragrances the wealthy used, it added little to cover up what was underneath. Unlike the tall buildings, the Mound of the Masters was a wide, short dome. It, too, had been cast in silver. Here, though, Dim found the casting more tasteful. The body of the silvery structure was covered in historic moments of mud's past. Most specifically, the founding. Since this had the effect of casting the city's history in metal, Dim gave this silver an approving nod. There was always a mass of citizens in the Mound of the Masters these days. Lampflies lit the walls and kept the space at a suitable brightness. Those lampflies had actually produced more light these days. Ever since Quill had shown the headlampers how to tend to them properly, the lampflies actually did their job much better than any Dim had seen before. He could hear the main hall of the Masters before he could see it. The Scubbian words bounced off the walls from multiple speakers. He smelled the pheromones from the termites before he saw them. They were all jumbled together, so he couldn't make sense of it all, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. The noise did not stop when Dim entered. The conflict had something to do with turns defending the walls of mud, and something to do with clay. "We defend the city with our lives," Master Puth said, scowling. Dim didn't know if Puth was able to do anything but scowl these days. "Where are your troops?" "We take our turns, the same as you," a termite said in Scub. She spoke slower than the others, but by termite standards, she was talking quite fast for Scub. "Then why are these tunnels you dig so deep only big enough for your kind to slip into?" Master Puth said. "They are necessary," the same termite said. "That isn't enough," Master Puth said. "We must know more than they are enough. We must know what is so necessary about them." The termite masters looked together and began speaking in Pharaoh. Dim's time with the ants had made him quite proficient at listening to it. It was all done in the matter of moments. The speed and subtlety in which the termites spoke in Pharaoh would have gone unnoticed by others, unless they caught a whiff of the sour scent in the air, one that smelled like someone had eaten too much rancid nectar. "We cannot tell them," Master Pipelin said. "It will cause them to worry too much." "They seem to be worrying already, Father," Master Tiff, the termite spokesperson, said. "If we concern them with the earthlings," another termite master, Vele, expressed in Pharaoh, "they'll mess their robes on the spot. We cannot concern them with the earthlings in our searches below." "What shall we say?" Gelden, the fourth termite, said. Dim crossed the hall of the masters. As the others saw Dim, they silenced themselves. He missed the days when he was practically invisible. In those days, he was only noticed enough for other bugs to get out of his way. Now they all seemed to watch him expectantly, like he had all the answers. He sat down and had to think for a moment before he spoke. "What is the problem?" he said. "Well spoken," Master Sid said. Your scub is improving. The termites are digging again, Master Puth said. They are taking from some of the soil stores we have built up and carrying it down into the earth. The Clares are up in arms about the loss of material, especially since they can't get any more without leaving mud. We all know why they can't do that. When the Clares are mad, the rest of the crafters get mad too. Dim looked down to see a coalition of Clares standing in the audience. You could tell who they were by the clay they allowed to build up on their shells. The more that was on them, the longer they had been digging. They let it build up, some believed it was intentional, over time to distinguish their class. They wore robes the same color as the clay, to appear totally covered. They also nodded at what Master Puth had said. And now, Dim said, trying to put words in the right order, do the termites answer? They don't, Master Puth said, despite Master Tiff opening her jaws to speak. Speak with them, Dim, Master Puth said. Help them understand. Dim waved a claw to Mellish, who produced a pheromonium and handed it to him. Puth eyed the disc and folded his forearms. Explain, Dim said. It's the Earthlings, Master Pipelin said in Pharaoh, so the other masters couldn't understand him. We found some points of weakness and we had to bury them. You know the risk of their escape, Dim. The ants would be the least of our worries. Dim clicked several buttons on the pheromonium, and then the top center button to release the scents he had added. The termites have few friends, the message started. What can we tell them to appease them? Why do we have to tell them anything? Master Pipelin said. We're keeping them safe and mitigating their panic at the same time. Dim set the switches on the pheromonium again and released its scent. Obviously they worry, Dim's message said. Perhaps build a subterranean living area below mud and tell them you're constructing new housing below. We do not lie, Master Geldon said. Dim gave a stern look to Master Geldon and did not proceed to press any buttons on his pharaoh disc. I believe that means we must then tell the truth, Master Pipelin said. Master Vele, see to it that we begin building a new chamber below. Yes, Master Pipelin, Master Vele said. Master Tiff, Master Pipelin continued. Tell them we aim to use some of the clay to build a living chamber, a place for population increase or storage, so it needs more strength. Master Tiff then began speaking, sharing the message. Dim watched as Master Puth tapped his claws against his desk as he sat. He was not satisfied with the answer. He shook his head and looked back at the pheromonium. The council did not approve such city changes, Master Puth said. Why have the termites begun doing this without consultation? You must see the worry that the Clares have. They suspected as much. They worry the efforts below the surface will damage what is above. Then we need the clay, and that worry will not come to fruition, Master Tiff said, in a final sort of way. We must see the plans for these new developments, Master Asid said. Give the termites time, Dim said in Scub. He stopped before breathing in and thinking harder about his words. His succinct battle speak was not best used here. The termite does not normally work with plans that are written. Please, allow more time to make these plans. Fine, Master Puth said. Tomorrow we'll have them present their plans. The termites nodded, but said nothing. The Clares were dismissed, and the room now had space to accept others. Dim watched as more bugs filled the room. He turned his head to see Master Asid call for the messenger Mellish. She whispered in her ear before sending Mellish to Dim. Thank you, Mellish said. If you need to go, Master Asid will handle the rest. The stags have requested you. Thank you, Mellish, Dim said. Always good to hear from you. He stood and made his way out of the hall. Once out, he navigated the city streets all the way until he came to the wall of the city. Climbing the wall and up several staircases, all the result of the termites, Dim arrived at the war room, where two stags stood looking over tables of papers with small rocks covering the surface. The room was large, with weapons lining the walls. Those weapons were bigger than most Mud had ever seen, but stag beetles could wield awkwardly large tools quite effectively. The room was built without walls, and a hole in the roof directly over the center of the room. That hole allowed for light to shine down via mirrors directly onto a large map. Pillars of wood held up the roof. They were spaced out enough for the stags to walk through them without issue. Dim was able to hear the low rumbling of the stag beetles' voices before he saw them. Ral, a bright green stag beetle, looked up at Dim as he approached, then back down at his paper. The natural light of the skylight made for colors of yellow, orange, and red to reflect off of his iridescent shell. The second stag beetle appeared slightly more like Dim. Gen was a red stag with a glossy shell. At some points the red would fade into a blackish color. He did not look up from the map. As Dim approached, he hummed one of the songs he remembered was a favorite amongst the stags. He remembered the days when many brothers would sing together, a rumble so violent it sent other creatures away in terror. Those were good times. Ral and Gen did not return the tune. They were busy speaking softly to each other while they pointed at the map. Dim joined them. The map was of mud and the surrounding areas. Minerals were used to indicate the forces. Large clumps of precious gems were used to indicate single large bodies of ants. Smaller gemstones were used to show the attacking forces. The ants' strategy was to attack on 5 different fronts, totally surrounding mud. Within mud there were small geode stones used to indicate mud's forces on the walls. They too were mainly set at 5 points where the ants were assaulting. "How are the defenses?" Dim said. "Many dead," Gen reported, wiping a pile of dirty and unbroken geode stones off of the map. "How many?" Dim said, listening to the many tinkling of geodes on the floor. "Many," Gen said. Ral shook his head and looked back down at the map. "Must find best way to spread little beetles. Wall guard best, but moving them makes parts of wall weak." "Little beetles are good gardeners," Gen said, "but not made for war." "They have small shells," Dim said, nodding, looking at the map. "But those shells are filled with brave hearts." "Ants have the numbers," Gen said. "Have masters considered escape plan?" Dim shook his head, but then reconsidered. He went to speak, but thought his old scub would deliver the news better than the proper scub he had been practicing. "Master Puth considered," Dim said, nodding. "But no. Masters believe they must win or die. No way out. Who can hide from ants?" Ral scowled. "Still some chance mud wins," he said. "Gen organized best groups. But even with best groups, little beetles cannot last without stags." Dim smiled. "Stags mean much to mud," he said. "Stags cannot last forever," Gen said. "Must hold out," Dim said, puffing out his chest. His eyes rested on Ral's beetle blade. It sat on the table in a scabbard. Dim admired the midnight black color of the sheath and the dark gems in the blade's hilt. Gen noticed Dim's gaze. "Freedom," he said, nodding his head. Dim noticed the lowness of Gen's antennae. Have they had any sleep? Dim thought. "Not freedom yet," Dim said, glad to speak less formally. "Freedom after war. Find best flowers and sweet nectar. Maybe find wives, have grubs. But stags do after war. Now it's wartime." "Much war," Ral said, nodding, a slight sigh in his words. "But brothers can fight for freedom," Dim said, trying to sound cheerful. "Better than fighting for ants. Always slave." "Ants stronger," Gen said. "Better training. Warring more desperate in mud." "Report defenses," Dim said, trying to change the subject. Ants have been fighting early in the morning, Gen said. Stags get little sleep. Little beetles lost much early this day. 4 platoons. Could not keep the dead from the ants. Dim nodded. How long have Ral and Gen been awake? He said. 8 bells, Gen said. Dim tried to stop himself from looking surprised. He forced his antennae to remain unperked. The ants would never have made any stag stay awake for so long. Even when they transitioned them from their natural sleep cycles, the ants took care to allow the stags plenty of rest. Potions will help tiredness, Dim said. When? Gen said. When potions arrive, Dim said. When potions arrive, Ral said. Soon, Dim said. Ral nodded. Dim could see a scowl on his face. Something was on Ral's mind, but he made no effort to say what. Dim has high hopes, Dim said. But potions must finish fermenting. Dangerous when not finished. Easily ruined. Difficult for stags to keep up with, Ral said. Little beetles cannot stop attacks alone. Always need stag, and many die. Repopulation has helped some, but not enough. Stags must fight at every assault to keep mud standing. Ants know stags always come. Potions must hurry. Dim nodded. An ant general would never have approved of a stag beetle speaking out of turn. He knew this because he had suffered the consequences many times, but Dim was unwilling to inflict such consequences. When one was fighting a war that they might die in, was that not punishment enough? Must hold until potions, Dim said. Potions will win war. Has Dim thought on what next? Gen said. Next, Dim said. Yes, Gen said. After mud's safe, what next? Lots next, Dim said. Could find females, could look for flowers, could... No, Gen said, shaking his head and holding up his claws to stop Dim from continuing. What next after mud defeats Colony 7? Colony 7 is part of bigger colony. United colonies. What happens when mud faces united colonies? Mud has more potions, Dim said. What if spies ruin secret flower garden? Ral said. Like in mud. Once mud wins war, Dim said, other beetles join in fight against ants. More than just beetles. Dim looked for understanding on Gen's face, but it remained confused and concerned. We'll help today with fighting, he said, not wanting to be tested on his next plans. His plan was simple. Survive. Mud is lucky to have 3 stags, Ral said, finally nodding in agreement. Knowing Dim would help must have been welcome news to him. Right number to fight Earthling, he said. Dim looked back at Ral's sword. Dim did not fight Earthling much, he said. Little Earthling was hard to survive. Dim guessed Big Earthling the same? Harder, Gen said, but had strong ant army for support. And Earthling has honor when fighting, Ral said. Ants only have honor for Queen Mother. A horn in the distance sounded. Ral straightened his back and looked into the distance for the location of the noise. South, Dim said without raising his head to look. Ral gave a curt nod. He lifted the sword off the table and walked to the balcony. Dim watched as he was able to see the other side of the sheath. There seemed to be patterns on the black scabbard, but they were too subtle for Dim to make out. Ral extended his wings and flew southward. Maybe blade of Dim's ancestors? Gen said. Dim shrugged. Thanks to ants, hard to know. Must be right color. Dim shrugged and rested his claws on the table as he looked down at the rocks on the map. Is not right for Dim to admire Ral's sword. Dim will do better. Blades were mixed, Gen said, holding his own sheathed sword in front of him. Its green and yellow inlays glistened. How did Dim get Blade without fighting long?
Dim did fight Earthling,
he said, lifting Chell, still ensconced in a burlap sack, from off his back and examining her from outside of the rough bag.
Chell was earned, but Dim did not want to live as other stags. Wanted freedom. Deserted Earthling fight. Earned Chell, but only against Little One. Dim never fought in Colosseum.
Deserting has its own honor.
It does not. Dim still questions his actions. The price of desertion has been troubled soul.
Why? What does Dim owe Ants?
Dim left brothers,
he said.
Is not about ants.
Needed done. Dim has saved Ral again. As desperate as battle is, bright future is still before stags. Dim nodded.
Free more stags. Make stag beetle colony. Have honorable fights between stags for females.
He expected joyous shouts from Gen. When he did not receive one, he looked to him. Gen stood holding his blade, examining the silver sheath and hilt with ripples like inlays of green and gold, with gems at the center of those ripples as if they had caused them. Mud is dear to Dim, Gen said.
Yes, Dim would rather do other things, but duty keeps Dim in mud.
How does Dim keep honor? Gen said. He breaks honor with ants but keeps it with Mudians. What is honor?
Dim is not perfect. Tries to do what Dim thinks fathers would do. Is Ral well? Points out facts and is sad.
Hard fight. Ral knows numbers well. Cannot see good outcome. Mud's escape plan is best plan.
Mud will not do it. Stubborn bugs. Termites wanted to leave, but I convinced them to stay.
Dim likes proper mud speak, Gen said. Is Dim still stag? Dim's antenna lifted as he realized he had switched in mid-sentence. To his credit, Dim had worked hard on proper Scubbian. Quill had drilled him on many things, speaking most of all. Dim didn't believe he would ever see the day when speaking well didn't take so much effort.
Accident,
he said.
Gen was saying?
Years of fighting for other. Be nice to fight for self. Another horn sounded. This one from the north side. Gen did not need any directional advice from Dim. In a moment, he had walked to the wall and lifted his beetle blade, sheath and all, and placed it on his back, securing it with straps. Others call, he said. Gen jumped off the side and flew into the distance. Dim watched as Gen landed on the northern side of the wall not far away. It was tiring work for these stags to fly so much. The ants' current battle strategy included attacking on one front and then switching to another as soon as the stags arrived. This meant that the stags were constantly flying from one location to the next as the ants harassed them on all sides of Mud. Dim could see the tiredness in his brother's eyes and antennae from their constant battling away of the attacks. The intelligence of the ants aggravated Dim.
In a fair fight, the ants would die,
he thought. He consciously switched back to the stag scub in his head.
But Dim cannot fault ants. Fair fight, not good. Assault is.
Another horn blew near Dim. He removed Chell from his back. The sack that covered her was itchy even to his arms. He walked out of the chamber and onto the wall. From his high vantage, he saw groups of ants attempting to run up the wall to his left. Multiple beetles stood at the top of the wall with long spears, ready to deliver ends to the ants.
Just a little longer, Dim said. Potions will come. Eventually.